Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Tillman. And so what I want to do today is I want to break down this 8 Can't Wait campaign. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's been trending a lot lately. And basically what people are doing is they're saying that we need to pass these 8 things immediately in order to, go for the police reform. And so I want to go step by step by each one, and I want you guys to realize what it actually means. You're going to be surprised in some places across the country within law enforcement departments, some of these are actually already into effect. In some places, they're not. And so I want to break down why or why not these are maybe good things or they may be bad things. So let's start with number one. Number one, to ban chokeholds or strangleholds. I want you guys to realize when I started the academy, we teach a lot of defensive tactics, other things that we can do so that way we don't always have to utilize the tools on our belt. One of the things they taught us was a hold, but it was not called the chokehold or the stranglehold. In fact, it was called the LVNR, which is a lateral vascular neck restraint. The reason that's so important is because when we're taught to utilize our forearm and our bicep to apply pressure around the carotid, which essentially cuts off the blood flow as opposed to the airflow. When you look at a chokehold or a stranglehold, you're actually cutting off the airflow and you can actually crush your throat, which is why it's so dangerous. That's why we're not taught these things. So when we utilize verbiage in something like this 8 Can't Wait and we talk about chokeholds and strangleholds, it's not actual verbiage. So I understand what people are saying. The carotid is a tool used in MMA fighting, and it's a tool that's used there because they know it won't necessarily be deadly if you're cutting off the blood flow. But what's essential with this is it has to be applied correctly. And what we've seen in the past is officers won't apply correctly. So going back to training and why we need money to fund training is because we need to be taught these certain type of tools for proper use of application, as opposed to, doing a good chokehold and think you're doing an LVNR technique, which is, we've seen that happen in the past. That's number one. Number two, to require de-escalation. I can tell you that most California police agencies already teach de-escalation techniques. In fact, we have crisis negotiation teams. When we go on a scene of somebody that's in a crisis, the number one thing we want to do is to go into de-escalation. Can I say that for every police department across the country? I can't, but I can tell you a lot of police officers or a lot of police agencies already are teaching de-escalation techniques. It's important. One thing as an officer is when we get on scene, we don't want to have to go ahead and use force or go hands-on if we don't have to. That's why de-escalation is critical, so this one can stand true. Number three, to require a warning before shooting. You have to understand something, that by case law, we actually are required to give warnings already before we shoot. It's called a use of force warning. Hey, stop what you're doing or force is going to be used. Hey, stop what you're doing or deadly force is going to be used. We are actually required to give warnings before we shoot. However, in that case law, it also says that when feasible. The reason that's important is because sometimes there have been situations where you're trying to get out of your car, you're trying to effect some type of arrest or utilize force on somebody, and it's absolutely not feasible to give a warning just because it happens so quickly. So I want you to realize that this is actually already included in some of our case law, which requires us to give that warning before we actually shoot. Number four, exhaust all alternatives before we shoot. I understand the concept and I understand why we want this. You have to realize, though, is that it is not always possible to exhaust every single less lethal option before we use lethal force. Prime example, there's a video that I posted a while back where some officers rolled up on scene where a guy that had a knife. As soon as they got out of that car, that guy approached them and ran up on them with the knife. The officers fired their gun and they hit him multiple times. However, that subject continued to run towards him and try to stab them. You have to realize is that if they try to use their taser, they try to use their baton, or they try to use their pepper spray, it may not be the best choice for that situation. So we're requiring officers to utilize every single force option before they utilize deadly force. It doesn't make sense sometimes just because they don't have that opportunity to do it. Are there situations where we can exhaust every single less lethal means? Absolutely. I've been on some of them myself where we utilize a taser, we utilize the beanbag round, we utilize some OC spray, whatever it may be before we got to that lethal force, but we were able to do it. But it's not feasible for every single situation, and that's why it's important to realize that it may not be wise to say, hey, look, they have to, because if they have to, it may cost them their life or somebody else in the imminent public their life. Number five, duty to intervene. Again, this is another one. This is already a requirement by most law enforcement departments across the country. However, are we actually implementing them? And so as officers, I'm going to sit here and talk to you specifically is we can do better in this department. I know it's hard sometimes. I know you may feel like, hey, I don't want to circumvent my supervisor, whatever it may be, but we do have an obligation to be better in this area, because if we are seeing an inhumane act going on like the one we saw in George Floyd, you have a duty to intervene. I posted another one that came out of LAPD a few weeks ago, where you had an officer going off on another person and his partner just stood there and watched. We have an obligation. We have a duty to intervene. This already exists, and officers, it's just the reality of it is we have to do better. Number 6, ban shooting at moving vehicles. You know, one of the things that I've learned over my course of the career as being a police officer is we got to get away from using certain language as ban or always or, you never, just because in law enforcement, you got to realize it's a very fluid profession, which means it's forever changing. Every single day I go to work as a police officer, I never have the same day. And so there are situations that we are faced with that may require us to use a certain level of force that we never intended to, just based on that situation. Prime example, there was a few years ago in Las Vegas where there were some deputies that were chasing after 2 homicide suspects that just escaped from the scene. As those guys are leaving and fleeing from the scene, they're actually shooting assault rifles from the moving vehicle. So that officer made a decision that, hey, I have to try to end this quickly. And so what he did is he shot from his car into their car, which was moving, to try to stop that threat. So I understand the concepts of where we're coming from by saying banning shooting at moving vehicles, but you got to realize we work in a profession that's always changing. Every single day we go to work is always different. So I might be faced with a situation where I may have to shoot it in a moving vehicle. That's why I like to say let's stay away from using words like ban, just because we never know what we're going to deal with as police officers when we go to work. Number 7, to establish a use of force continuum. Again, this already exists. Shame on us officers if we're not familiar with what the use of force continuum is, and that's where you come into play as far as studying what you're supposed to be doing, studying your policy, studying case law. The use of force continuum exists. However, in that continuum, it doesn't say that you have to start from A and then end at Z. The use of force continuum is created so that way you know, like, hey, we always want to, if feasible, if plausible, we want to start with less lethal options, start with the de-escalation, but it does say that you can go from de-escalation to immediately go to lethal force if need be, just based on the situation. The use of force continuum already exists. However, it's up to us to study it and what it means and how we can utilize that in our day-to-day jobs. And number 8, require all force be reported. Again, at least at my department, this already exists. Can I say the same for every single police department across the country? I cannot. I know that the moment we go hands-on with somebody, you're most likely going to be cutting paper on that. Anytime we utilize any type of force on somebody, we're most likely going to be cutting paper on that. So most uses of forces are reported. The reason I say most is because I cannot speak for every police department across the country. I know in my department, that's a fact. We are reporting every single thing that happens anytime we utilize force. But can we do better in this department as a law enforcement as a whole? Absolutely. And so as officers, we can't be afraid or can't be ashamed to say that, oh man, we have to write everything down that we do anytime we use hands-on or go hands-on. No, it should be there. And so I know my department, we're light years ahead of some agencies, but this is a requirement for a lot of other departments across the state of California and in other places across the United States. So in this video, I hope you guys understand that a lot of the things that are coming from the 8 Can't Wait already exist. The thing that's important is to realize the verbiage that we're utilizing. So when we say ban, well, it's hard to ban things because in law enforcement, things are fluid, things are rapidly evolving, things are always changing. So if I ban it for one situation, if that's the best option in another situation, now I'm out of policy because I did something that I wasn't supposed to do based on something that was created at one incident. I hope this helps you guys out when you guys are looking at what 8 Can't Wait is. Thanks again and God bless.